Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up a flex fuel based tune within our Motec M1 programming. Now, in order to successfully configure and set up a flex fuel tune, we first need to configure and set up a flex fuel composition sensor. Now, the flex fuel composition sensor needs to be physically installed in your fuel system. I typically install it in the feed line, but it can be installed in the return line. Then we have to wire the signal wire from our flex fuel sensor into our Motec under a digital input. And then we need to translate that digital reading into an ethanol concentration percentage value so that we can scale out our fuel and spark timing and even boost control based on our ethanol concentration. So what we'll find, we have this modeling that we can work with in here, and essentially we can compensate for our ethanol concentration variation as we're running our engine. So as we change our ethanol blend, we can have a hands-off approach to making sure that the fuel and spark timing are dialed in to our engine. Now we do have to do a little bit of tuning and configuration for things like our cranking fuel and our spark timing. We'll talk about how that's all going to go here in this training modules, getting a general idea of what we can expect. We will be doing a demonstration of flex fuel tuning with a demo vehicle in our live training portion of the training course that will be coming up. So keep an eye out for that. But what we're going to cover in this training module is going to be the essentials that you need to know that can be applied to any engine for doing flex fuel based tuning. So first things first, let's look at how to set up a flex fuel sensor. Now I have covered this in a previous training module earlier in the training course, but we're going to cover it here. So I want to go and essentially set up all the flex fuel configuration from start to finish in this training module, so you have one area to look for to reference flex fuel tuning. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is jump out of our fuel tuning area here, and we need to jump into setting up our flex fuel sensor. Now we can do that in two different locations for the layouts here that I provided with the training course. So we're going to go up here under the My Workbook area. We're going to move into our setup area here. We can either configure the flex fuel sensor under our advanced input section here, or we can jump into the two windows that I've created for setting up and working with our flex fuel. Let's just jump into our very first window. This is where we're going to actually configure and set up the Motec for working in the flex fuel mode, and then as well as calibrating and setting up our flex fuel sensor. Now we're also going to touch on setting up our fuel temperature portion of our flex fuel reading. That is going to be something you absolutely want to do if you have a flex fuel sensor installed. And I recommend to put a flex fuel sensor in your fuel system, regardless if you plan on doing any ethanol flex fuel style tuning or not, because we can then translate what the actual ethanol concentration is in the fuel system to the Motec, as well as the fuel temperature. Both are broadcasted on the same digital output from the sensor. This improves our fuel modeling, again, even if we're not running ethanol fuel. So regardless, every time I'm doing an M1 install, I purchase a flex fuel sensor, I configure and set it up. It just improves the overall modeling within our Motec. So let's jump in and take a look at setting up our flex fuel sensor as well as our fuel temperature sensor. So if we go here into calibrate window, and then we go ahead and do F6, this will expand our window out. Now we can see everything on our screen for setting up and configuring our flex fuel sensor. If I go here to composition and we start to go down here in our tree and expand it out, we're going to find we have a lot of variables to account for. So let me go ahead and expand everything out. Now I already have the flex fuel sensor configured, so we're going to run through this real quick and just look at what we need to populate within our parameters here so we understand what's going on. First things first, under the composition sensor resource, we need to assign this to whatever universal digital input we've wired our signal into from our flex fuel sensor. In my case, I've used the universal digital 4 as where I've wired that signal, and the signal will be a frequency signal. It's 50 to 150 hertz. So 50 hertz is associated to 0% ethanol. 150 hertz is associated to 100% ethanol concentration. So this is telling the Motec where to look for the sensor resource that we've wired the signal wire into. So we're going to go ahead and choose the A option. The A option is going to be what we need for this first portion here. Now, under the sensor, the calibration, you can normally just select this GM part number, which is the Continental part number for the normal flex fuel sensor you'll find on the market. You could set this to manual, allows us to program some other specific bits of information, but I'm going to go ahead and just select this option here because this GM part number doesn't match up to my Continental GM sensor, but it is going to hold true and valid. It still has that same scale of 50 to 150 hertz. So everything else is going to be good. Diagnostic delay, 500 milliseconds is fine. Voltage, filter, I shouldn't need to have any filter. We'll leave it at 0 milliseconds. And then reference, we want to leave it on absolute. Now the digital decode resource, we're going to find that this is going to be set on the actual input that we want to choose. So universal digital input 4 is what we want to select. So the sensor resource has to go to the universal digital 4A, and then the universal digital input will be decode resource. So that's very important. If you've set it up on digital 3 or digital 2 or digital 10, whatever your universal digital, you'll select that as right here, universal digital, whatever the number input you're using, and then the A, and then decode resource, set that under that universal option, under that specific input. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk really briefly about how to set up our fuel temperature sensor. So we're gonna go ahead and collapse the screen down and we'll do F6. Now I don't have the fuel temperature sensor window for programming in here. We can take a step backwards under our advanced inputs. Now in here, we can go in and set up our fuel temperature programming, and we can take a look specifically under our fuel temp sensor resource. Now we can see right now it's setting and not in use. If we don't have a fuel temp sensor wired into the Motec, then we'll find it utilizes this fuel temp estimate value. This estimate value will be used essentially for reference in all of the calculations that are referencing fuel temperature. Now, it's definitely not ideal, but this can work. But if we have a flex fuel sensor installed, we have that broadcast signal from the flex fuel sensor on the signal line, it's also broadcasting fuel temperature. So in this case, we want to go ahead and assign this. Now in my situation, I just want to be very specific here. We can see right now the fuel composition sensor showing about 9.4%.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.